Okay. One thing I found out is that I do not get to record visuals if I'm not doing a screen share. For whatever reason, my system is separating out each camera by itself. So the only way I can record a video that I can actually share with people is if I'm recording while I'm doing a screen share, which is, awesome. Sigh. So I hope you guys don't mind. When we get started, what I want to do is look at a couple different projects. Donald and Joy, have both of you submitted your projects?
I just did, yeah.
Okay, all right, great. How about you, Donald? Um, Joey, when we get to your project, would you mind just like spending a minute talking about it or, a couple seconds talking about it?
Yeah, no, not at all. Hopefully I did it right.
Okay. Well, that's nice because you've taken other classes from me. I when we go over this, what I want to do is talk about the projects. We'll talk about what's great, what's working. We'll talk about some of the things that can be done to be better. And it's not to attack anybody. It's just so that everybody understands what's going on. And I've seen that. So this for the most part, these are the first time I'm looking at these projects for everybody.
Yeah,
Uh,
you can be brutally honest on mine because I won't have my feelings hurt. So if I did something wrong, then just yeah, I can be an example.
well, what I'm finding is that three things are happening. Either one, the thing is not in the scope of this class, which is 1350 to present day, or if it's talking about something outside of the scope, it's not clearly connecting it to the scope of this class. So if you want to talk about um, Art Nouveau or Art Deco, then you can bring in Egyptian influence, and then you could do a project where you show some Egyptian art and then show the Art Deco or Art Nouveau art that's directly related to it. That would be fine. So, but without the connection, it's not going to get points yet. And then another thing is doesn't follow like for the research projects, there's three different examples of what those projects will look like when they're presented. And for the discovery projects, there's three different examples of how that will look like. And so those might be, if there's detriments, that might be part of it. And then the third thing is the citations aren't correctly done or are correctly formatted, or they don't include um, the access on dates. So those three things are the things that I'm seeing that people are losing points for. But we'll go through and look at stuff. So I haven't graded um, any of these yet. Just and you guys are seeing them for the first. Joey and Donald are seeing them for the first time. Okay, so can you guys see my screen share where we're looking at your first project and then this person is doing something on Leonardo da Vinci?
No, I'm just seeing just your face.
Okay. Because from my perspective, it's saying that I am sharing my screen. Can you see it now? Donald, can you see anything? I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to try again. Okay, is it working this time?
There it is. Yep.
Okay, all right. So it looks to me like this person is doing the 5-page essay with the images embedded in. Okay. One of the things I say about the 5-page essay is that it needs to be, the pictures can't be bigger than 2 square inches. And some of these are a little bit bigger. I would say this person probably should include paragraphs that are describing each of the photos used. So I would hope for a little bit more writing because I think this first paragraph is pretty good. This first page would be just fine. This page, maybe this might be better presented in slide format as a PowerPoint. That might be better, where they could actually do a PowerPoint slide showing these two photos and then do a narration to talk about it. But yeah, the pages seem really, really, really sparse because this is starting, and it feels like this is better. These would be better presented as PowerPoint slides. And then the person could actually share their thoughts about what they're seeing. That's what I would suggest for this person. And then for the citations, I I like how they've formatted this. These first two are really pretty good. This one is out of alphabetical order and it needs the accessed on phrase in the same format right at the end of the citation. So I think this is a really good start, and that's what I would suggest this person doing. I think it's a really strong start. This is interesting because this page is not loading. So this person did turn something in. I think they probably need to resubmit because it's not showing up. This one is a movie, and we're not. This is not very successful to show during the class, for because of the system, not because of what this person did. And one thing that I did notice is that not everybody who submitted their project actually submitted to the discussion page. So when you submit your project, please also submit to the discussion page. It is only 5 points, but that allows everybody else in the class to see what you've done. Okay, so this is a video again. We're not going to be able to see it, but could you describe what you did? And this we know before Joey, we know for sure that this fits with the class scope because the unicorn in captivity is one of the images we saw from the Northern Renaissance. So you're locked in there. Excellent. Could you describe what you did in your MP4?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm not a great essayist, which that's usually what I try to do in your classes. And so this format was quite a bit easier for me. And but I actually felt like I learned a lot from it because I got to put the images up in PowerPoint, and then what I did was just I watched the stuff that we saw in class, and then I kind of bounced around and did a bunch of other research just to sort of like spend time with it. And then I just took notes and then kind of compiled the notes and then created a narration with the slides.
All right,
And
great. How
then
many
it,
slides? Sorry.
I did five photos. So that was the weird part because it's just the one image. And so I tried to like zoom in on parts of the tapestry to highlight what I was talking about or sort of isolate like the thing I was talking about. And then, yeah,
That's a great idea.
yeah, it was easier than, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, professor, but it was easier than writing an essay. But,
Well, and
again, it was,
sorry, continue. Sorry.
oh, I was going to say, I still feel like I got a lot out of it because it made me think about it.
All right, great. How many sources did you look at? when you're doing your research?
I only cited one source because some of the stuff I was looking at wasn't um, really scholarly, I guess, you know. So
Right.
yeah.
But I like that idea of, you're applying the tools of artistic critique to something and you're honing in on different portions and you're going in, it's essentially a deep dive into the unicorn in captivity when you're tightening in on different things that you're talking about. And I like that. If anybody has problems with writing or anything like that, I have no problem with you putting together an MP4 of a PowerPoint set of slides, honing in on different things like Joey's describing, and then talking about them verbally. I think that's a great way to do it. Because you're sharing your thought, your research and things like that. And I really appreciate it. I think that that's a great way to address the issue. Okay, this is, if you're going to be doing an essay, this is a really good example of the essay. Okay, so the person is not having one or two photos on a page and that's it. They're actually writing around the photos, and this is exactly the kind of thing that we're looking at for the essay. So that other one we looked at earlier would be absolutely perfect as a PowerPoint presentation because they could talk about it as you see each of the images. This person, we have the 8 pictures, we have they've really deep dived into the application of the 4 tools of artistic critique. That is great. So I think this is a beautiful example of that. And then we look in here, we see the citations of sources. This is something that I see some people doing where they will center everything. And please don't do that. Please do a left, um, I forget what it's called, a left side. I'm sorry, the word is totally left my head, but I would really prefer that you just anchor it to the left side because this kind of centering is really hard on the eyes and it's very difficult to actually understand what's going on. So I would request that people just do the left side anchoring, just like you
Uh,
did.
is it justified? Is that the word?
Yeah, yeah, left side justification. Excellent. Just like right here with the paragraphs and the writing is left side justification. This probably does need to be indented. Thank you, Joey, for that. And I would also recommend doing work when you do the works cited, just do an insert page here so that you don't have works cited by itself and then everything else. But this person, the only thing that they're really lacking, and I do really appreciate this is the sources for all their images. And one thing I really appreciate is doing images in order from top to bottom. These are the titles of all the images that they used, and I think that that's great. So I would recommend on this person, the only thing that they're really missing is these citations all need to be alphabetically ordered, and they all need to include, at the end, they all need to include the accessed on date phrase at the end here. So after this period, I would write accessed on and then the date and make sure that you use the same format for all 4 citations. And just double check to make sure that each of these citations are in correct MLA format. So left side justification, please, and then including the accessed on and alphabetize this. So this person, once they take care of those edits, this is going to be a really good example of the kind of thing that we're looking for. Now, they could make this longer if they wanted to do, this is just single space. If they want to do 1.5 or 2 double space, this would easily make it 7 pages long. So that's why I'm saying I think they did a really, really good job on this. Here's another movie. We're not gonna link to that because it's not working in the formatting of this presentation. With Teams, we could do that and watch the movie, but I don't, I haven't, I'm not familiar enough with Zoom calls yet to do that. Okay, so Colton is saying he's doing a discovery project where he went to a museum. On this, what I would, this has the access on phrase of this one, but it doesn't have it on this one, so this one needs it. And when you're visiting a museum, um, it'd be really great if we could see any more of what you saw in the museum. That would be awesome. If you take pictures and stuff like that at the museum, I think this is a great first project for a discovery project of a museum. But if we are talking about the museum visit as the discovery project, um, there, I would hope for a bit more of the bit more of the sharing of the experience as itself. It looks like to me that they went to the museum, they found this object in the museum, and then did a critique of that object. So I think that this works for a first project. I would, if you're going to go back to another museum visit for another discovery project, please share more about your experience. And I think that would work out really well. So I think this is looking good. I think the only thing that this needs is an accessed on date right here. I think that'll work out. Okay, so Colton, can you talk about your experience in this? Why you chose this museum? Oh, okay. Um, Colton is saying he has really low speed internet, so he can't interact with us really well. I didn't see that in the chat until just now. All right, that's just fine. I like that you were able to go to this. Uh, we need to make sure also that for museum tours and stuff like that needs to happen during the time of this semester. So, like talking about, I went to the museum, knowing when you went is really important because that's one thing that I do point out in the assignment. It needs to be something done within the semester time period of this class. So Colton, if you wouldn't mind, when you go and edit in this accessed on phrase right here, also mention when you went to the museum right up here. I think that will make it work out. Okay, so this person did the annotated bibliography. For the annotated bibliography, you need 5 sources, and each source, the annotations need to have a summary and then a reflection. And Savannah did a great job of doing that. Because I'm seeing each of these sources, Savannah has done a really good job citing it. And then here's a summary paragraph and a reflection paragraph. Next one, citing it as the accessed on date, summary, and reflection. And it looks like Savannah did a really good job in alphabetizing these sources as well. The only thing is that these last 2 citations do not have the accessed on phrase. So that they just need that on there. And then this one I think is really well done. because the person is, notice there are two paragraphs for each and every one of the citations. These are the annotations. The first paragraph is the summary of what they saw or what they encountered with that material. And then the second paragraph is their reflection on the material. So from this source, I learned how Brunelleschi combined innovation with classical inspiration. So doing really, that turned out really well. The only things missing is we need the accessed on phrase there for that last one, and the access on phrase for the second to last citation. And it looks like everything else is done really well. And it looks like everything else is also done in organized in alphabetical order. So great job, Savannah. All right, so those are looking really, really good. All right, so this is okay. I'm switching to Mughal art and cultural exchange. Joey, can you see that? Okay. So I really like what people are doing with their projects. Again, the most important thing is to tie it directly into the material that we're covering for this course, which is 1350 to the present day. Now, this week's module is Mughal art and cultural exchange. Uh, the Mughal, now I am honestly kind of jumping around a little bit on time because we went to the Renaissance and we went to Italian Renaissance and then the Northern Renaissance, Northern European Renaissance, and that covers pretty much from about 1350 to uh, right before 1500, right around there. And this time period, it's overlapping, but it's moving forward a little bit. But I wanted to bring in what was going on parallel to the European Renaissances, what was happening in India. And Mughal, that word, I hope it makes you think of Mongol, which is the people the Mughal dynasty were direct descendants of both Tamerlane and the Mongols, which were world conquerors in throughout Asia and Southeast Asia and an area called Transoxiana. Transoxiana is a word I hope you haven't heard before because I like to show off how smart I am. Transoxiana means basically the area coming into Europe. Trans means in transition, in the process of moving. And Oxiana is a really old word that references Europe. If Oriental deals with Asia, Southeast Asia, Middle East, um, Occidental references the European continent. So that's why I like saying Transoxiana because it makes everybody stop for a second and think, well, what are you talking about? And then it gives me an excuse to explain why I'm very, very smart. And so I want you guys to have that word in your vocabulary so you can do the same thing. In fact, Thanksgiving, you can just talk when people say, "What did you study?" You'd say, "Oh, we talked about art from Transoxiana," and everybody's going to say, "Wow, what does that mean?" And then you have an excuse to pull open your bag of tricks, use your big girl words, and explain to everybody how smart you are. So, just you're welcome. Is all I'm saying. But the Mughals were founded by a Muslim family. It was direct descendants of both Tamerlane and Genghis Khan, who built empires during the time that Europeans were embroiled with the Crusades in North Africa and Jerusalem and going into Turkey. Tamerlane and Genghis Khan were carving out empires throughout Asia, covering a lot of present day China into the Middle East, and even impacting through trade a lot of India and North Africa. their direct descendant, so he comes from the bloodline of both of them, were a guy named Babur. And Babur, he was very much a Muslim, and he found out very quickly that he could make a lot more money by connecting with people, to work with them, and cohabitate with them, make friends with them, uh, than by starting wars with them. And there were a lot of conflicts, and he actually had one of his descendants that ended up basically causing the decline and fall of the Mughal Empire. Um, he started he started fights. He started picking fights with the Muslims. I mean, with the non-Muslims in India. And but Babur himself and his children and grandchildren were very instrumental in creating an empire in India that was just phenomenal. Produced a lot of really beautiful art, but they were also very open-minded. Muslims get in the media are portrayed as being very close-minded, very insular, not wanting to work with other people. But Babur found very quickly that if he made friends with the other people in India, that included Hindus, Zoroastrians, Christians, and many, many other faiths, including Zoroastrians, well, he's already said Zoroastrians, but including a lot of the traditional religions present at the time. He made an empire that was just became incredibly wealthy. And at this time, comprised easily 10% of the entire world's population. And in this area that he was in India, we're talking about anywhere. I do mention a couple different religions, Hindus and Zoroastrians and Christians, but we're also talking about ethnicities. Oh, we're talking about anywhere between 200 and 400 languages, representing 200 and 400 distinct ethnicities in this part of India. One of the beautiful things I think about traditional Hinduism is that traditional Hinduism has this idea that there is one principal deity, but that deity is expressed in over 10,000 different facets. And so a lot of people who claimed Hinduism for much of the history of India uh, were able to get along with the people that thought differently than them because they were able to tell themselves, well, this is just another facet of divinity. So I think that's fantastic. And with Muslims going in ruling India, let's see if I can find a map. I'm just going to look up Mughal India map, and you can see this area. Let's see. This is a really good visual. Can you see this, Joey? I'm showing my screen. It should say Mughal Empire in India. Are you seeing this?
Yep,
Okay.
perfect.
All right, great. In this area, in this part of the world, like I said, there's several hundred different distinct ethnic groups, and the Mughals were Muslims that lived right in this part of the area. So they were in control of a lot of these rivers and lakes that transported goods from this part of the continent towards in the Indian Ocean and the Bay of Bengal. Then they went out to travel around the rest of essentially the Muslim Empire, traded with a lot of Southeast Asia, and a lot of these goods went around the Horn of Africa and went into Europe. Or the easier route was going into Turkey and going into the Mediterranean across um, through the areas of Turkey. So they controlled a lot of trade routes, and by making friends with all these different ethnic groups, they were able to peacefully get a lot of the income as goods were traveling around. And very quickly, they were able to tap into those aspects of Islam which supported freedom of worship and expression of many different faiths. One of the things the Prophet Muhammad taught was that, and this is not something that's really popularized in today's media. One of the things the Prophet Muhammad taught in Islam was that you do not know how other people are expressing their faith just by looking at them from the outside. Only God knows their heart. And so you can make the justification as a Muslim ruler that that person is doing what God wants them to do by living the life that they're being directed to live as a Hindu, as a Zoroastrian, or even as a Christian. And by the Mughals really celebrating that aspect of Islam made it so that they were able to peacefully coexist and with a lot of other worldviews. And as we go into look at some of the architecture, I would like you to watch these videos, watch them at 1.5 speeds, just because Joey, are you seeing my screen now where I'm going back to the module?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Watch these videos. They give you a little bit of background on Tamerlane. But as we're looking at some of the Mughal Empire and their reputation, one of the things that they were known for, even in Europe, so we're talking about 2,000 miles away, was that the Mughals supported these salons where people of all different religious backgrounds and worldviews get together and talk and visit with each other. And so it was an honor for Christians from Turkey and Europe to get to go to India because it would give them a chance to convince the Muslims to look at the world through their perspective. And it was just a really interesting time of the world. One of the most beautiful buildings in the history of the planet were built at this time, Taj Mahal. But I wanted to share with you a little bit of this geometry that the Mughals were really interested in. If we look at this diagram is called the City of Heaven, or the Heavenly City. This was used by a lot of Christian mystics in Europe. And you can see a very strong vertical line, very strong horizontal line because of the way that these circles line up. And this kind of geometry lends itself to some very interesting things. This is directly related to what Da Vinci was doing with his Vitruvian Man diagram. You see a circle and a square. If we draw a circle, um, right here, and we're going to the outside of these circles right here, and this square right here to these points. So it's an imaginary circle. It's a circle to the outside of these smaller circles. The circumference of that circle and the perimeter of that square are going to be very close to the same measurements. And this is a reference to the Vitruvian Man diagram of Da Vinci that everybody sees, where you have the naked man with 4 arms and 4 legs. This is what he's referring to. If we look down here, this is a diagram of a typical Persian garden. Now, when I put this image in, it distorted a bit. The typical Persian garden is actually based on a square, but you have this very strong horizontal line and very strong vertical line, and you have some measurements that you can overlap this Persian garden on top of the heavenly city diagram and see some very interesting things going on. And we'll reference this in just a second when we look at something else. Mughal architecture, this is where I'm going to show you some examples of this, but I want to reference something. You guys have probably heard of this building. And the reason why I'm typing this out is that this building is referenced in videos that we're not going to be able to see because of um, my unfamiliarity with Zoom. But what is really interesting, this building, I hope you guys all recognize this. This is a really beautiful example of Indian architecture. And what is fascinating about it is if we look at the footprint of it, and I'll type that in. Again, this is in the videos. Oh, I'm not seeing it right there. If we look at the footprint of the Taj Mahal, this is kind of what I want to share with you. You see, this is where the Taj Mahal is right here, and you see the gardens around it. You have the very strong Persian garden, and then if we start getting into more detail of the Taj Mahal itself, you actually will see that it overlaps that heavenly city diagram quite a bit. This is the Taj Mahal, where you start seeing a lot of these little circles and stuff like that. And what's fascinating to me about that, I'm sorry, you can just see a little bit of it in this particular image. The videos do a better job of showing that. But what is fascinating is the Mughal emperors were enough familiar with both Zoroastrianism, and you can see that very clearly in this garden, that Persian garden kind of diagram. But they were also very familiar with the European heavenly city diagram. And there are a couple art historians that were able to show that the footprint of the Taj Mahal itself is directly related to the geometry in that heavenly city diagram. So the Mughals were able to tie together both Zoroastrian and Christian symbolism in this very Muslim and Indian structure, which I think is really interesting. This is, I thought this was I'm sorry, I was looking for an article rather than a video so I could show it to you. So here's a really good article that I like. Let's see, I'm gonna try to minimize this. 25 examples of Mughal architecture. Now, can you see this image of the Taj Mahal, Joey? Okay.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it is incredibly gorgeous. It is one of the most beautiful buildings ever built. But we'll look at this, and then we'll look quickly at some of this other architecture, some of these other architectural images, and I want you to look for commonalities. But this is pretty indicative of Mughal Indian architecture. So some of the features I'm going to point out is we have these minarets. These are used as calls to prayer. So the courtyard was used for people to pray in. And we look at these arches, and we look at these particular domes, and we look at this structure, this cupola that is on top. This is called a 4-point arch, where we start with, it kind of is reminiscent of that Roman style arch, but you have this peak right here. The angle changes right here and it goes pretty straight up to this peak. It's called a 4-point arch because in generating it, you start with a line across here and you find 4 points to put your compass on to get this arc, this very, very shallow arc, this shallow arc, and then this more round and obvious arc. So there's 4 center points for those to be discovered. And we can also, or it's also called a peak arch. What is significant about this as well is this particular arch is used in wadi, or this style of arch is used in wadis that were Muslim constructed buildings on trade routes that were built around sites of wells or springs. A wadi is essentially an oasis Airbnb. It was a building that was used, designed not to, or to stand the test of time. They started showing up around the 7th, 8th century on Muslim areas of trade routes. And they were just, the rule was when you found one of these, you left what you could, you used what you needed to, you take advantage of the water, used it as shelter, and then you went on after cleaning up behind yourself. And so they were unmanned, there weren't anybody keeping track of them, but this kind of arch, this big arch opening was used a lot of the time because with this peak right here, it was discovered that when wind would come in or when the air would circulate in, this would cause it to make a little bit of a cyclone, a vertical cyclone, and then come back down again cooler. And so in like very hot desert arid areas, this type of arch was used as a kind of permanent low-tech air conditioning. It was high-tech, but it was low maintenance air conditioning. And so a lot of the times when I see this in Muslim, particularly Mughal architecture, I'll refer to this as a wadi arch because it is directly related to that kind of a theme. This is related to uh, this was built as a funerary palace and resurrection machine for the favorite wife of one of the Mughal emperors. And so it's designed to give you ideas of refreshment, separation from the regular workaday world, an idea of connecting with the ease that comes with heaven. So making these arches in a shape that reminds you of these oasis Airbnbs seems to make a lot of sense. And notice that there are multiple tones of stone, but it's all based on this theme of white. And we can see the tone is less a change of color and than a change of texture. And in here, there are inlaid stones that are scripture references from the Quran. And in here, there are inlaid stones that are images of stylized plant life. And in Islam, plant life like this is directly related to the kind of abundance and uh, just beautiful growth that happens in heaven. So a couple of things to what I'm talking about basically comes down to we have minarets, we have this kind of cupola, we have this kind of an arched dome that mimics this kind of peak rather than the very round Roman style dome. We have these kind of peak arches, and we have this multi-tonal uh, uh, facade or decoration going on. So we're not going to see those things in all the examples of Indian architecture or Mughal Indian architecture, but we're going to see echoes of many of them. And when we look at this next one, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Oh, we're talking about the comic book pages here. These are the there's a particular name for these books, and Shahnameh, these rules of the kings kind of books. They're all hand painted, and they look very much like contemporary comic books. Well, we're talking about years that is at the tail end of the Renaissance, and this is the reign of Akbar. So this is at the height. But Babur started in when at the end of the 15th century to about the middle of the 16th century. So we're talking about right at the tail end of the Renaissance is when the Mughals started. So it did overlap some, or it actually overlapped a little bit with the Renaissance, and then it overlapped quite a bit with the next thing we look at when we're in, go back to Europe. So when we look at this is called the Red Fort, I believe. And it is pretty indicative of a lot of Indian architecture. And this shows you another element that I want you to be mindful of too. But we can see these peak arches or 4-point arches, or I made another name up for them. Do you remember what the other name was?
Wadi.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I don't, the scale of this white dot right here is a person. So if you can imagine the wind coming in here, circling around in that archway, and then coming back down to perform to like it's a basically solid state air conditioning. But this brings in a couple of the elements that we just talked about looking at the Taj Mahal. We got this distinctive dome that kind of bellies out a little bit instead of being round. It's kind of references like onion dome kind of idea. Heavy influence in southern Russia and Eastern Europe. We have these cupolas and the minarets again. We have that kind of 4-point arch dome. And instead of being white, this is red and white. And we have that kind of variation of texture, that design texture that we saw on the outside of the Taj Mahal. But in here, they're using red sandstone and white marble. And then two other things that we didn't see with the Taj Mahal. It was present in Taj Mahal, but it was really tiny. One of them is, see the scalloping right here on some of the larger arches. And sometimes it'll be on the smaller arches too. But this scalloping is very distinctive to both Umayyad Spain, which is several hundred years earlier, and another Muslim area, and then also this Mughal Indian architecture has this scalloped arches. Very interesting. Then, so that's one difference, one additional thing from what we saw at Taj Mahal. And then we see this. See these little things right here? Now, this is not a castle. You would see these in Crusader castles to protect archers on the, these are stylized crenellations. Now, this, with the minarets, this marks it as more of a spiritual or religious structure. And you're not going to have an awful lot of battlements on most spiritual or religious structures, but this becomes a design element that's also used in Mughal architecture for religious buildings as well. These kind of stylized um, uh, battlements or they're called crenellations. And what's interesting to me is that these crenellations were designed originally to shelter archers, so you could stand behind this taller piece and shoot an arrow out in the narrow opening. What's fascinating about these Mughal crenellations is that they are stylized flowers. They're specifically stylized lotuses, which I think is really kind of interesting. And we can see when we zoom in, we can see looks like there might be some scalloping on these arches as well. So look out for that distinctive patterning, the interesting shape of these domes, the scalloped arches, the peaked arches, the minarets and cupolas, and then also these kind of stylized flowers used for the crenellations. Now this kind of stuff, this kind of detail, the Hindu architecture, when they did columns, they would have these interesting facets, or they would have ribs on the columns, not like the flutes that are carved into Greek or Roman columns. These have a lot more substantial girth to them. And then there would be a lot of these kind of bird designs in Hindu architecture that were at the tops of the columns. And in Islamic architecture, it's really rare to see a lot of animals incorporated directly into the architectural structures, particularly if they're for religious purposes. But sometimes you'll see elements that seem reminiscent of bird or elephant motifs, which is really fascinating. And you talk about there's a lot of red sandstone is a very common material. And that's how you get this design. It's white marble with red sandstone. And we got the Taj Mahal has this kind of similar pattern, but instead of using red sandstone, they would just do make a different visual texture. So in this case, these are verses of the Quran that are laid in darker stone into the white marble. And the battlements and fortifications, yeah, there were a lot of castles. The Mughals sometimes in some areas had a lot of armed conflicts with the people in the area until they understood that it was beneficial to both sides. And then later on, towards the end of the Mughal Empire, there were more armed conflicts, and things kind of fell apart a little bit, which is sad. Not a little bit; they fell apart a lot. So this is another view of the Taj Mahal with these reflecting pools, and this is a pool from one of those Persian style gardens. This is
I can't see
uh,
the photo now.
what's that?
I said I can't. If you're showing a photo, I can't see it.
Okay, we're in the same.
I'm
I'm
just. I can just see your face again.
okay. That's okay. I'm going to stop sharing and do the share again because it seems like this is having a hard time maintaining the share. Okay, so here we go. All right, can you see it now?
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Joey, for telling me because I don't see when it stops. So we're looking at fortifications, this castle theme. And what's really interesting to me is that a lot of the Mughal castles are based on earlier models that were developed during the Crusades by a lot of the Christians and Christian and Muslim interaction. But that's for the 2710 class. So best examples of Mughal architecture, Taj Mahal, of course. We step, this is, can you see the Taj Mahal here and the red fort here in the foreground? And then in between them is that really big Persian style garden. And what's interesting to me is that the Taj Mahal is based more on the footprint of that heavenly city diagram that I was talking about. And then this red fort is based more on the Persian garden uh, diagram, where you have the very obvious four quarters and it looks like a square from the top. But what's interesting about this is I want to point out the cupolas, the minarets, these stylized crenellations that have absolutely no military function at all when they're this high up. We have that kind of tall peaked arch that kind of reminds me of the Wadi arch. You can't see it in this picture because it's so far away, but there's a lot of scalloping there. And then notice the design work with can you see the really beautiful design work that's incorporates both the red sandstone and the white marble on the
Yeah, it's
outside of it?
really. Yeah, it's really striking how that white marble just is like it just fit right there.
Now, now this was built around the 16th century, so about 100 years after the height of the Renaissance in Europe. But I'm going to show you something. If we look at Renaissance architecture, and we just see images of Renaissance buildings, I hope you can see in some of these buildings some of that same kind of awareness of red and white design. And particularly if we look at this one here, it's not identical. Can you see what I'm seeing? This is Brunelleschi's dome.
Yeah, yeah,
We have some of that same kind of geometric design going on with the Renaissance. It seems like there was some red and black, red and white, but a lot of times it had black lines to make those similar kind of designs. And it's interesting to me that this was before the Mughal architecture. So I wonder if some of that Renaissance um, aesthetic made it over to India, and that's what was informing what the Mughal architects were doing. Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I don't. That'd be worth a research project. Somebody could find that out. Are you seeing, I'm trying to share the Mughal architecture page again.
Yep, yep, it's there.
Okay. But I mean, particularly in something like this makes me think of Brunelleschi's dome a little bit, these cupolas here. And I think that's fascinating. And we have some of these arches are the pointed arch, but these are more arch, these are facades. They're not true arches because they don't go anywhere. They're just the walls. And this is the full red fort. This was designed as a military battlement, and that's why you don't have a lot of open windows everywhere. But I hope you can pick out some of the design work, even on this, even though it's all red sandstone, you still see like those thin lines like we saw in that Renaissance architecture, the peaked arch, the fantastical crenellations, the kind of floral designs. I, but are you seeing some art consistency with this architecture?
Yeah, very much so. Um, yeah, pretty neat.
Now, we talked about 7 different elements, but you don't see all 7 in each of these buildings. You see maybe 3 or 4, but there does seem to be the consistency with design. I really, this mosque is one of the most beautiful mosques I've ever seen when it's lit up, but it really shouts a lot to me that these guys were very aware of what the Renaissance designers had done. Because in this case, when we look over here, Brunelleschi's dome, you have the black rectangle lines on the white marble. Can you see that? And then we go back to the Badshahi Mosque and we see the white lines on the red marble. They're almost the same designs. And the biggest difference is instead of rounded arches, we have the scalloped peak arch. We have that big wadi kind of arch right here. We have the floral crenellations up here. It seems to me like they were thinking, how else can we make this building really pretty? And I think it's exciting to me. And we have that faceted column, like that is very consistent with Hindu architecture. We have the cupolas on the minarets. We have that onion style dome. We have a lot of those things going on. So we're just going to look at a couple others. I'm not going to talk about the rest of them, but I hope you can see a lot of these consistencies. Like this is another really good example that has a lot of those hallmarks in it. So definitely, this is just they're starting to get ridiculous. This reminds me of like gingerbread decoration. They're thinking, okay, what else can we stick on this? Let's just put it all here. And these are beautiful. These are absolutely beautiful buildings. Now this is a tomb. It still has the minarets. And that I think since this is a tomb, I think it could also be used. The courtyards are big enough that this could also be used as a prayer site if people wanted to. But this is definitely a tomb, and it's not designed specifically as a mosque. You know, um, there are some videos here. I would like you to watch them. This is talks about the Red Fort in particular, and then this also talks about the Taj Mahal. Can you see this page? We've gone back to the module.
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
Okay. It seems like there's a little bit of a lag time, and sometimes it drops the sharing. Now, I talk about um, the comic book ideas, and these are mostly videos that I'm having people look at. But we're talking about miniature painting, and so I'm going to open up another browser window and um, just talk about Mughal miniature painting. I'm gonna put this link directly into that module so you guys can see some more images that are not in video format. But the Victoria and Albert Museum have a lot of these beautiful pages. The Shahnameh was a tradition that people think originated in Persia. And it looks like it started right around the 10th century. And it's this idea of making miniature books that were all hand painted. And these books, this is only about the size of your notebook. Okay, so they're not big at all, but the detail is astonishing to the point where if you saw these people in a crowd, you'd be able to recognize them. So this idea that only the European Renaissance was responsible for making photorealistic imagery first, is not right. Um, and what is fascinating to me is not just how much detail, but some of these pages are. This is only 400 years old, but some of these pages are almost 1,000 years old, and it's incredible the amount of detail that they have in. And I'm just going to point out a couple things as I just froth at the mouth with how beautiful this is. First off, the Shahnameh means king of the rulers, or book of the rulers, or book of kings. Nameh is basically an illustrated book, and Shah is a Persian word for ruler, king, or emperor. And so some of these books would have history going back, and both history, folklore, and legendary history going back sometimes a couple thousand years. And some of these books would be quite thick, but they would be commissioned for a ruler that was expected to live at least 20 or 30 years. So these books are designed to be made over decades, essentially. And they would be a legacy left by the ruler. An artist might spend years on one side of one page. So we have photorealistic rendering. We have these stylized plants and then stylized plant themes going throughout. We have a very stylized foreground, a canonization of the human form that is a lot closer to what we see in like naturalistic expression of the naturalistic rendering. But the things I want to point out are, one, you have a lot of backgrounds and foregrounds that are very stylized. This looks, yeah, it relates very much to grass that you might see, but the flowers are drawn or painted more like botanical specimen renderings, where it's all flat. And then you get some of these carpeted areas that very much look like the Persian type carpet. And these two things are indicative to me that these people were very aware of Plato, for example, and the writings of the early Christians, the writings of the early Greeks and Romans. Um, and the reason why I bring that up is that this style of rendering, this stylistic rendering, is meant to show the ideal of a space or the ideal of a plant, not necessarily a naturalistic rendering of a plant. And you can tell they can be naturalistic. So this is evidence of a conscious choice to be stylized. And in some of these renderings, this stylistic rendering is designed to show idealized plants. So they're very aware of Plato's discussions on the world of the real and the world of the ideal. At this time in Islamic philosophy, the way that you indicate heaven in art is through the idealized rendering or the stylized renderings of plants, where you show them as perfect specimens all the time. Then you're referencing not just heaven, but you're referencing a world that's outside of ordinary passage of time. So by doing these kinds of things, they're not they're not denying the possibility of perspective. They're not denying these kinds of things because they don't know how to do them. They're using these kinds of stylistic rendering very specifically to give you a deeper message. Like, for example, this kind of stylization of plant forms harkens back to the world of the ideal is a reference to heaven, kind of giving a little bit of an underscore to the idea that this person's is ruling under the mandate of heaven. This idealized rendering of the foreground is not as precise, it's not as particular. So this is more of an idea that this is in a space out of time. Like we looked at Mary holding the baby Jesus is being rendered in something outside of regular temporal um, history. And so, and these people, are beautifully rendered at the height of their health and their career. So it's a way of recording an event to make it feel like it's a timeless portrait, for example, that this ruler is always going to be at his perfect age. The ambassadors are always going to be ideally, or they're always going to be caught at their ideal age. That's how we want to remember them. Is all this kind of making sense? And they're showing this architectural space to make you think that this is an architectural pavilion. This is not what it really looks like. This is a fiction. We're all in on the fiction. We all know it's a fiction, but it's meant to represent this. And the reason why I believe that that's primarily what they're doing to represent architecture, not to portray architecture realistically, is you look at these stairs, they do understand perspective. And then you have stylized plants here. And what's fascinating to me is that you look at all of these images, it's the same kind of thing. And they're using architectural spaces to pull out different sections so you understand this is a set group. This is a set group. These people are talking here. This is one conversation. This guy is kind of directing your attention over here, but this is one group of people. It's meant to be seen as one group of people. This is another space. This is meant to be seen as another group of people over here. It's very much comic book paneling. You can see what the story is because the groups are set aside. Is this all making sense?
Yeah, very much. I'm really struck too by the way the colors are blocked out. Like they're using the way the the clothing of everyone's or the color of everyone's apparel to sort of move your eyes in a really interesting way.
Yes. Yeah. These guys are masters of color theory, as well as color symbolism, and it shows. I mean, the people that would do this, make these books, would know how to do this and would be practicing for decades before they'd be allowed to come near these books. They knew what they were doing. And some of these you can tell that some of these are earlier, some of these are by different artists, but they tell different stories. They relate different things. Um, and some of the stories are just really, really gruesome. But again, we have the stylization that they know how to render things photorealistically, okay? But they're doing things specifically to communicate a story or to communicate an idea, not just to because they didn't know any better. And so, when you look at a person's face, the way that it is um, painted is to show you what culture the person is from. Sometimes it's photorealistic. Sometimes it's an idealization that this is just a random ambassador from that culture, but that's who they come from. So it communicates a lot more than just what's going on in story wise. And sometimes the artist has been told what a bear looks like or what a monkey looks like or what a baboon looks like, but never saw one in real life, so they're doing the best they can. And so that's why it looks distorted too. But very, very interesting stuff. A lot of this reminds me of at about the same time in Japan, which is a couple thousand miles, to the east, you get paintings of um, the folklore and demons and ghost stories where the you get animals and giants being shown a specific way in these Shahnameh images, and you get a very similar style being used in Japanese art too. So I wonder if there was some sort of relationship that they had as well. I don't know if they do or not, but I just think it's interesting. And I want you to look at these videos because what's fun to me is this Bahari miniature painting. This person demonstrates the technique, and this video talks about exactly what you were talking about, Joey, the color, what do the colors mean, those kinds of things. And then I also have Lady Mechanica is one of my favorite artists, and they are going through their technique, which is very similar to the traditional Shahnameh technique that is still being practiced in India. And so I thought those would be kind of fun. And then this is exciting to me because um, Rembrandt did a sketch that somebody found several years ago. They theorized that maybe he was trained by somebody in India. And of course, Rembrandt is uh, a Baroque artist. But what's fascinating is somebody just recently discovered a couple pages in Rembrandt's collection where he actually had Shahnameh pages that he had copied in his own drawings, and they were able to find the original pages that he had seen from India that he was referencing in these drawings, which I think is fantastic. So, and then we come to the reflection. But those are the two things that I think I really want people to think about, come away from looking at India. The Mughals were masters of a particular style of architecture that we now think is a very Indian architecture. And they were masters of these miniature paintings with just an absurd level of detail. And it's just very exciting. So definitely take the time to watch these videos. Um, there was, as an example of how much the Mughals were open to embracing influence of other cultures around them. Uh, in some of these miniature paintings of Muslim families, we think of a hijab, the hair covering, as a very Muslim thing, and it actually originated, its roots are from Mesopotamia, but Jewish culture used it, and then when the Christians moved into the Middle East and stuff, they were heavily influenced, even earlier, by the very Jewish influences. So so third, fourth, fifth century Christians were using the hair coverings that the Jews had pioneered. And then later on, you get to the seventh century with the Muslims, um, when the Prophet Muhammad wanted men to recognize the humanhood of women, he looked to his Christian fellows, and he adapted the Christian hair covering for women to use and then called it the hijab. That's where the hijab comes from. It's adapted from Christians who picked it up from earlier Jews. And then what's fascinating is that throughout the history of Islam, like on the news wants you to believe that all Muslims only believe in and using the burqa, which is a complete covering. And it's only like in Turkey, maybe a third to half of the women will actually use the hair covering, the hijab. And in other countries, it varies, but sometimes it's, from the face back. Sometimes you only see the eyes. Sometimes, like the chador is the version used in Persia, where it's basically a one-piece garment that's like a blanket that you hold over your hair and then you clutch with your left hand, which I think is really interesting. But in but the idea was pretty consistent around 15th, 16th century in most Muslim countries that it needed to be an opaque garment that covered the hair. And then you get to India, and under the Mughals, that transformed. And you look at some of the historical sequence of paintings from a complete solid opaque hair covering to a diaphanous um, lace that was used. It's almost invisible because the lace is so filmy. And then you see at the height of the Mughal Empire, a lot of women are covering their hair, Muslim women are covering their hair with a veil that's very lacy. And it's interesting because those designs that they developed kind of made their way back and influenced a little, it seems to me it influenced a little bit of Italian fashion. So by the time we get to the 18th century, the Italian Catholic women are wearing these very lacy, barely there coverings on their hair. And then, of course, that becomes the bridal veil that we see in the West. I just think it's really interesting. We assume all these things from the media representations, and we have these expectations that just transform around the world until they come back to us. So that the bridal veil for Christians is based on it appears to be based on the diaphanous veil from the Italians who were might have been influenced by the Mughals, that their filmy veils, and they picked up their veils from the Christians that Muhammad encountered. And so the bridal veil is the hijab filtered through all these different things. I just think that that's really interesting. Anyway, any questions or observations about the stuff that we looked at today?
I see all these kids walking around wearing the same shoes I wore in high school, so same idea. But those
Oh,
are also
the
from the
exact same
60s.
idea. Eerie. No, but yeah, isn't that interesting that the stuff that you and I thought was cool, so cool when we wore it as teenagers is now the height of fashion, and they'd be so grossed out if they knew that we had worn it when we were their age.
Nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, very true. And it is interesting to me that we do see trade going back and forth and evidence of trade from India to Transoxiana or Turkey into Italy, into Western Europe, back, North Africa, and then we see all these influences touching on each other. And it is there's a guy named Attar, who was a poet, he was a Persian poet, about 13th century, wrote something called the Parliament of Birds, where all the birds in the world elect 12 birds to um, represent them to go find the phoenix and ultimate enlightenment. And each of these birds represent a different kind of person, and so the duck is very practical, likes to cook, likes is waddles around, is very, very focused on being a merchant. And of course, the peacock is kind of showy. And what is interesting is that, and the stork is kind of quiet, but is very industrious. And what is really interesting to me is that during the Crusades, people coming back to Europe brought these stereotypes back with them. So you see the duck or the goose on kitchen towels, and you see the stork on traditional sewing scissors. And it relates back to the same kind of thing. And it's interesting to me that we can see parallels. And it'd be fascinating if somebody did want to do research on that. But to see those designs showing up in the Renaissance and then later showing up in Mughal architecture and then coming back and influencing Eastern Europe later on is really interesting. We have this idea, and this is the last example, and then I'll shut up. But we have the idea of that central dome, a very particular kind of dome shape with the minarets and stuff like that, this very strong idea of what a traditional Muslim mosque looks like. And we'll go into this a little bit later next week. But what's fascinating to me is we see that, and every time we see that building structure, all of us think of it's a mosque, it's Muslim. But what's fascinating is that that structure was originated by Constantine when he moved the Roman Empire to Turkey. And he wanted to build a building that would glorify God like he had never been glorified in the history of the world before. And he built the Hagia Sophia, or the celebration of godly wisdom. And that building that was so big, the central dome, this was built in the fourth century. The central dome was so tall you could stand the Statue of Liberty up inside of it. That when the Muslims governed Turkey 1,000 years later. They were so struck by the beauty of that building that that informed all Muslim architecture from that part of the world moving forward. And that's why today we think that this is Muslim architecture, because they were inspired by a Christian architect. And I think that's amazing. When Mehmet II finished conquering Constantinople and marched in, his men were going around and looting wherever they could, but he stopped them from looting Constantine's church because he said, truly, this is a house of God, and he protected it. And it struck them so much that that informed Muslim architecture ever after. I just, stuff like that, I think is just amazing. Anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful week and weekend. And I'm going to be grading the reflections. I've started, not the reflections, the projects. And I want everybody to know whatever grade you get is not your final grade. And sometimes it'll be, oh, you need it, you're getting a 0 because you got to tie this into the class material. As soon as you tie it in, then you get a score. Or sometimes you may miss several points because you didn't get the formatting right or whatever it is. That is not your final score. Go back and resubmit. I think the record for resubmissions is 6, and a person walked away with a perfect score after that 6th resubmission. So don't give up, and keep in mind some of the things we talked about today. And if anybody has any questions about those projects, we'll talk about it again next week. One thing I did notice is that a couple of people spent a lot of energy on their projects, and it might be that you want to split them into 2. And if that's the case, I'll tell you about it, and then you can resubmit half of it for the points this time, and then later on do it, resubmit the second half for your project number 2. That's happened a couple times. But anyway, thank you very much. What I'm seeing is really exciting, and I look forward to showing you guys what we're going to be dealing with next week as well. So any last observations, Joey?
Nope. Yeah, it's a fun one. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week.
See ya.